This week, we welcome Chris Niggle, Regional Chief Security Officer of the Americas at Okta, to discuss Okta's Secure Sign-In Trends Report. Companies are getting smarter about MFA. In the Leadership and Communication segment, how good leaders become great by never leading alone, how leaders can prepare their teams for 2025, nervous about public speaking? Here's how to use notes like a pro, and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. ThreatLocker implements a least privileged approach to cybersecurity, blocking every executable unless specifically authorized by your team. This methodology mitigates ransomware, supply chain attacks, and zero-day exploits, and ensures 24/7, 365 protection for your organization. To learn more about how ThreatLocker can help prevent known and unknown threats in your digital environment, safeguard your data and operations from threat actors, and align your organization with respected compliance frameworks, visit securityweekly.com/ThreatLocker. If your organization is ready to enhance cyber resilience, we have important insights for you. The Level Blue Futures Report 2024 sheds light on how rapid computing changes affect IT visibility. Our research reveals that while IT leaders see positive outcomes, 85% acknowledge increased risk. In this report, we identify the barriers to cyber resilience, the challenges impacting cybersecurity, and the business context that reveal operational issues. You'll also discover what's on the horizon and 5 essential steps for prioritizing cyber resilience. Get your complimentary copy of this crucial research today by visiting securityweekly.com/levelblue. Cybersecurity simplified. Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 375, recorded December 9th, 2024. I am your host, Matt Alderman. Joining me for this interview segment is my co-host, Mr. Ben Carr. Welcome, Ben.
Hey, Matt. Great to be with you today.
Glad you're back. Yeah, you were out there for a few weeks, so we're getting back in the groove.
Out again, this afternoon, headed to London, so yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, you've been traveling all over, buddy. Yeah. This segment is sponsored by Okta. To learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/Okta. Chris Niggle is the Regional Chief Security Officer of the Americas at Okta, where he is responsible for corporate security compliance, third-party risk, and responding to customer security inquiries. Prior to Okta, Chris spent 6 years leading the adoption of cloud technologies at LinkedIn, helping them grow from 350 to over 6,800 employees. He started his career designing, developing, and delivering content management, system administration, and messaging solutions for customers such as Nestle, Cisco, AMD, TELUS, and the U.S. Department of Defense. Chris, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Good day. Thank you for having me.
So you have some interesting responsibilities. Third-party risk, one of my favorites, by the way. I used to run a third-party risk management program for one of the large banks. 70,000 vendors with Excel spreadsheets and email is no fun. I'll just tell you that now.
It's easy, Matt. Come on, it's easy. Third-party risk and spreadsheets, I love it all day long.
Everyone loves third-party risk.
Everybody loves it. But we're not going to talk about third-party risk today. We're going to talk about Okta's Secure Sign-In report. And what I find interesting about this report, before we dig in a little bit, is we just had Jeff Pollard from Forrester on 6 weeks ago. We were talking about spending in 2025. And one of the things he said you need to stop spending money on is non-phishing resistant MFA. And I see the phishing resistant MFA in this report, but I'm just curious on your thoughts around this concept of MFA versus phishing resistant MFA, because we've seen so many attacks on MFA. Are you seeing the same things just generally in the kind of the report data as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So phishing resistant MFA, right, is multi-factor authentication that's cryptographically tied to a device. So ultimately, it can't be proxied through one of the phishing as a service type platforms. Now, in this report, we were really focused on MFA, or multi-factor authentication adoption, kind of holistically. So we have seen some increases in the adoption of phishing-resistant MFA, but we also did see increases in adoption of non-phishing resistant MFA. So things like SMS or push notifications. Ultimately, we'd rather see increased MFA adoption as a whole, as opposed to an organization maybe stopping a project because they're trying to move purely to a phishing resistant model, right? We all just need to reduce the risk associated with our employees.
Yeah. Because again, I hear you, right? Which is any MFA is better than no MFA, but phishing resistant MFA is probably better than non-phishing resistant MFA because we've seen there's been so many documented attacks on from an MFA perspective. So I hear your point.
Yeah,
Sure.
exactly. As we look at rollouts of phishing resistant MFA, we see a lot of organizations are focusing on doing that for their what they view as high risk employees. So things like executives, privileged account holders, such as assistants, administrators. But when we look at the attacks, we see more and more attacks against the IT help desk or customer support resources as well. So our advice is if you're looking at doing a phishing resistant rollout and you need to reduce the scope of that, don't forget about your help desk operators because they're the ones who are actually being targeted.
Chris, can you dig into that a bit more? So I'm interested in when you talk about that, right? Like I've often heard this concept on let's focus, and we're risk professionals, so it's always like let's focus on the most risky things. Let's prioritize, right? We've heard a lot in the vulnerability space. Let's prioritize some vulnerabilities. Yet, like every user's a risky user in a way, right? Like, I mean, yes, there are probably people that have very little access to anything, but there's always that jump point to the next thing and something else, right? And I think that's why we see the attacks against MFA, the attacks against other methods that people have said, oh, well, we have MFA, so we're good. But hackers are going to try to target, malicious actors are going to try to target anything they can, right? And so there's really no user that's a safe user.
You're absolutely correct. We want to ensure that MFA is deployed across an entire organization. But when we look at the threat models for actors like that are coming out of the COM or coming out of a scattered spider, those threat actors have historically targeted to great effect the help desk and privileged help desk users, and then pivoting on to domain admins. So at least if we can think about our rollouts from those perspectives, show the benefit of strong multi-factor authentication and phishing-resistant authentication, because that's the other piece that we really explored in the report, then a security or IT group is going to have better success in pushing out those authenticators to the rest of the organization.
So is there a downside or an impact to phishing-resistant MFA over normal MFA, right? Is there a hesitancy? Is it cost? Is it user experience? Like, why not just deploy phishing-resistant MFA everywhere?
So that really depends on your specific use case and an employee base. So for many of us, especially who are in technology companies or who are in companies where we have the ability to control the types of endpoints that our employees are using, there's really no negative to push to moving towards phishing-resistant authentication. In fact, there's a lot of positives to it. The user experience is much, much better. However, if we're in a environment where maybe we can't control the types of systems that our users have. A great example here is on the customer identity side of things, right?
Yeah, consumer side, right? Banking and that kind of thing.
Yeah, we can't enforce, my bank can't enforce all of their customers are using modern iPhones that have Touch ID. So there has to be an ability to support other types of authentication. Now, the nice thing is WebAuthn, biometrics, and TPM chips are becoming more and more mainstream. And so with that, we're going to see much stronger adoption of phishing-resistant authentication, even in that consumer space.
Oh, good. Yeah, I remember when MFA came out, and I think I was working for RSA at the time. They're like, tokens galore. And then, no, that's not how it worked out.
Yeah, we all had a stack of tokens.
And I remember the days carrying the fob around. Yeah.
Yep.
The key ring of fobs.
Yep. Every customer had a fob, right? Like, no, it wasn't going to scale. So, Chris, in your data, I look at the adoption rates, and what is slowing down adoption? Like, we know the human's the weakest link. We know compromised credentials is a huge attack vector. Why haven't we gotten to 100% adoption of MFA? What's holding us back?
So I think what's interesting there is, in particular, the amount of pushback that we receive from customers when we are forcing multi-factor authentication. So over the last couple of years, a number of organizations, GitHub, Snowflake, Okta included, have been enforcing MFA for administrative accounts. And in rolling that out to organizations, to customers that may not have had that turned on, we do receive a surprising amount of pushback. I think a lot of that is just associated with workflows, as well as the experience that we all had with those tokens, and at some point, right, leaving them on a desk and not being able to do our work, and the concern about the impact that may have to a frontline employee or an administrative employee. So organizations are moving in that direction. It's not moving quite as quickly as we would like, but we're seeing a significant increase in MFA, especially with privileged users, just over the last year.
So it's the friction side of this, right?
It really is the friction.
That's really surprising, though, because I can't imagine anybody hasn't had a decent experience with a modern MFA product, right? To say, yeah, this is pretty frictionless. It doesn't bother me, right? Like, I've seen some pushback internally, but generally it's been pretty good. But I'm always amazed at companies that you come across, you interact with, you go to work for, and you find out, yeah, we don't have MFA. It's like, how is that possible, right?
And we explore a lot of the friction in the latter part of the report as we look at the types of authenticators and the usability of those. And what we see is, with the more traditional authenticators, so things like SMS, the enrollment time is quite long. It's 20, 30 seconds because of that need to go back and forth between multiple devices. When we look at something like a WebAuthn token or Okta FastPass, the enrollment time is much, much shorter because you're trusting the TPM that's on the device. And then the actual usability of that is much shorter. Now, the challenge is, these modern authentication methods, we're still seeing single digits of adoption with those. So I think, Ben, to your point, customers just haven't been exposed to modern authentication as much as they have to those to kind of legacy versions. And as that exposure increases, we're going to see a big growth in adoption and recognition of that ease of use.
So, Chris, I want to ask you something. We talked about third-party risk really early on, right? And I want to kind of tie something back and see if there's a connection. So when we talk about adoption, and, I'm surprised, as a consumer, I'm surprised sometimes, right? When I'm working with a company and like they don't offer multi-factor authentication, I'm like, really? Like, how am I supposed to trust this interaction? But I was at an industry conference, insurance, and we were talking about like why the insurance industry hasn't been really great at, moving further along than it has. And we came upon this discussion, and I brought up this topic that, look, the questions when you get asked by a third party or an insurer about like, hey, do this questionnaire, answer these questions, and let's find out like how you rank on the security index. People will ask questions, a binary question like, do you have MFA? And people will answer, yes, I do, somewhere on some system. But nobody asks like, what's the coverage rate? What type of MFA? Is it modern MFA? How many factors do you use? And so it's really easy to answer yes. What are your thoughts on that? Right, like is that part of the problem that we're not actually being specific enough in our interactions with each other? Both, I mean, it's hard on the consumer side, but certainly like B2B, that's a lot easier, right? And if we let people off the hook, it kind of we're at our own mercy there. Thoughts?
Mhm. Yeah, with insurance, especially cyber insurance, I think a lot of organizations, are willing to check that box and say yes, right? We have MFA, but it probably more benefits the insurer, because when they go in after a claim has been made, well, is MFA actually on this system that was compromised? It wasn't. We had it in some other
Yeah.
place, right? And that allows them to potentially deny that claim.
Deny the claim. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we've started to see some of that, some stories about that come out in the media. I think as organizations recognize that, they're going to become a lot more kind of risk averse, and again, we'll see stronger adoption of MFA as well as desires to push to phishing resistant
Yeah. Let's
MFA.
hope.
I think
Yeah.
we're going to see those questions.
Yeah. Chris, as I've been going through the report, like I'm looking at different pieces of this report. So I look at the industry adoption rate, and I am shocked that finance and banking and healthcare and pharma are actually on the bottom half of that list. Like these are two of the industries that have been the most highly regulated for the last 20 years. And their adoption rates are like 64 and 59% respectively. I mean, that's barely better than some of like retail at 43, which is also surprising with PCI, by the way. Like PCI DSS,
But
and
is
your
that the
retail at
consumer
43%.
side?
I don't know.
Is that,
like that's what
is
I'm
that
curious.
the issue, like of not being able to mandate devices, like kind of rearing its ugly head there and skewing the results?
So the results are focused on our workforce identity customers. So the thought around the consumer side skewing things is we've taken that off the table.
Wow, that is surprising then.
Yeah.
I think what you're seeing is with those industries is there is a fairly high amount of employees that are seasonal or transient, right? Who have just shorter tenure, or they're organizations which are supporting, essentially franchises, right? So insurance needs to be able to support a large number of agents that don't necessarily work for that insurer, and so being able to provide them with a good user experience is arguably more important than rolling out strong authentication. Now, we're hoping that
Until they
we'll
have an
see
issue.
some change, exactly, until there's a problem. When we start looking at things like WebAuthn or FastPass, which are very easy to use. So here at Okta, right, we have very short session lifetimes. I re-authenticate probably 6-8 times a day. It's as simple as touching the fingerprint reader on my laptop. You don't think about it. It doesn't interact that workflow. As we're able to push those types of authentication methods to these transient workforces, right, if you will, I think we're going to start seeing those numbers come up.
You also talk a little bit about passwordless in this report. So walk me through, I hear the term, but is it really passwordless? Like, and then what are you measuring differently about that adoption over traditional username password with multi-factor authentication, for example?
Mm-hmm. So authentication, as we know, there's 3 ways of doing that. Right? Something that you know, something that you have, or something that you are. So passwordless is getting rid of the something that you know and focusing on the other 2. The way that we look at it is are individuals authenticating using passwords over that review period of a month, or not. So what we found was actually 5% of Okta users, our customers' users, are authenticating without using a password. So they're using something that validates a device as well as something that they are. So a biometric, Touch ID, Windows Hello, and the like.
Got it. That's great. And so that's growing. I know Microsoft's been pushing this concept of passwordless too, right? In their configuration settings. And so I'm seeing more interest in passwordless. I'm just curious, if we thought MFA friction was hard, isn't passwordless authentication also a little hard from a friction standpoint? Because you got to have a device that supports that capability, right? And so I don't know how that compares to the MFA friction, but my guess is there's going to be some there too as well.
Well, you can do passwordless without it being phishing resistant. And so that opens up the ability to use more devices. So things like a push notification or the number matching that you see on some authenticators as well. I mean, ultimately, when we look at the table at the end of the report, where we look at the usability versus the security, passwords are at the bottom of that security list. We know the problems that users have with passwords. The need to create passwords that can't be remembered, the password reuse across multiple platforms. The fact that it's a very easily phishable factor. Just moving to other types of authenticators allows you to move up that both that security and usability scale.
And so if you were to project out over the next couple years, how do you see these trends continuing? Like, when do we get to this state where we can move away from passwords into something like a password list that just gives us higher security and better usability? Like, do you have any projections or thoughts what that looks like?
So, I mean, I'd love to see us in a passwordless model, but I don't expect that. There's just too many legacy applications and the need to support a lot of different use cases where having knowledge-based factors is going to be the way to go. We look at devices that our parents use, or coming back to that, like a manufacturing facility where a biometric, a fingerprint can't be used because of protective equipment. We're still going to need to have some sort of knowledge-based factor in there.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I would definitely see this varying by industry, especially manufacturing, transportation, some of those industries where you have some of that. So maybe even utilities and stuff, because there's so many devices that are, not don't have the capabilities. But I mean, if I think about, again, I go back to finance and healthcare and some of these things, I'm like, how do we not get there, right? Like,
we're moving in the right direction with solutions like passkeys. You've likely seen that rolled out in more applications that you're using and on your mobile devices. And so I think really what it's going to come down to is us as consumers utilizing these capabilities and demanding it from our vendors. So we started by talking about third-party risk. As you're going through your programs, require your vendors to support single sign-on, to support the ability to use platforms that have strong authentication. As you're purchasing new equipment, look for equipment that has TPM chips and biometric capabilities. So as an organization, when you're doing your refresh, you're ready to go when these technologies come online.
Yeah, I mean, those are great tips, right? Because I think to get to nirvana, we need to think about it a little more and kind of enforce it almost in some respects, both from our vendor side, but also from our side, like making sure when we do a refresh, like I love my new MacBook Pro, like just the ability to have the little fingerprint scanner right on, it's like, boop, it just simplifies stuff. But again, it's a newer capability, it's a newer device. Not all the devices have it, but man, when we can get devices changed out with just a little fingerprint thing on it, it makes things so much easier.
Yeah, it really does. And the Face ID or Windows Hello, just being able to sit down in the machine and it recognizes you is tremendously powerful.
So, Chris, do you worry about the long-term potential misuse for that, right? Like, especially as we've seen the rise of like deep fakes and audio, and I think early on when biometrics, were first starting to be used, that was a concern about the potential. Like, look, if it's a biometric, like I can't change my biometrics, right? Like I'm locked in. So if somebody figures out how to spoof my fingerprint or my facial recognition, that's a problem, right? Like that burns all biometrics then. So how do you handle that in this, exponential growth world of AI and threat actors?
So a lot of that is we're relying on the technology that's in the endpoint. And a big question that we receive as well from customers that are trying to move in this direction is, well, am I giving you, Okta, my biometric information? Because that starts getting into all sorts of privacy regulations and GDPR problems and whatnot. These technologies perform all of the authentication on the hardware.
Locally,
so your biometrics never leave the TPM chip on the device, which also means that as the attacks change and new capabilities exist, then we have the ability to upgrade that hardware and your back end, all of your cloud applications that are relying on that don't have to be changed so long as they're standards compliant.
Yeah, but upgrading the hardware could be pretty expensive, right? Like we've already talked about the gap between legacy devices and moving on to something that has the current more modern authentication. So that can be a challenge too, right, in adoption.
Absolutely. And as we look at that, it also leans into defense in depth. So putting in controls, a big thing that we see customers adopting from an authentication perspective is just shutting off the ability to authenticate if your machine is behind a residential proxy or an anonymizing proxy like Tor. It's surprising how many customers don't have that turned on. And honestly, are your employees ever going to use Tor to do real work? Probably not.
Well, should you question them if they are?
Right.
But the attackers are.
Yeah,
Correct.
100%. That's a really good tip. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Chris, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been a great conversation.
To learn how to secure sign-in with effective MFA, please visit securityweekly.com/Okta. We'll take a quick break and then cover the leadership and communications articles for this week.